What you're looking at is a simulation of a black hole with 100,000 particles. There are so many particles on screen right now that YouTube resolution probably doesn't even allow all of them to be drawn at the same time. However, all of these particles are interacting with one another, with each of them having their own gravitational attraction and collisions. So how is it even possible to simulate this? Well, we start off with one particle. We represent the particle as a point with a radius r and a mass m. The particle also has a position and an acceleration, but does not have a velocity. Instead, we keep track of its previous position to calculate its velocity because we use something called Verlet integration for the collisions. Technically, we can use Euler integration, but you can see how much more stable Verlet integration is during collisions. Now that we have this particle, let's give it a random velocity and then add it to our scene. However, this is quite boring, so let's give it some friends. Uh-oh, our simulation's at 10 FPS and we haven't even had 12,000 particles yet. To solve this, let's bring our entire simulation into Rust. For this video, I didn't feel like using a graphics library like Vulkan or Bevy to display the particles. So instead, I'll just bring the simulation code into Rust, export the simulation, and then display it in Python. This also means that our simulation is no longer real time, so if you want to see me make it real time using the GPU, please like and subscribe. Anyways, let's add more particles to our simulation. You can see we can now easily simulate 100,000 particles, and I've also added the ability to zoom into the simulation. In fact, the bottleneck here is still the Python program, which has issues displaying this many particles at once, so I'll just throttle the renderer and then speed it up for you guys. Now let's add gravity. For this video, gravity will be modeled using Newton's equation, so no Einstein or any special relativity stuff. Newton's equation essentially says that the total gravitational force would be the sum of the gravitational forces of all the particles. So we loop through all the particles and loop through all of them again to calculate their average force. And while this works, you quickly notice that this would be a very slow algorithm since we're essentially comparing each particle to every other particle, making the time complexity n squared. When running this with only 1,000 particles, you can see that even for non-real-time applications, this is unreasonably slow. Therefore, I use an approximation technique called Barnes' Hut that looks at faraway groups of particles and estimates their total gravitational attraction through their center of mass. Now, to quickly find their center of mass, we use a data structure called a quadtree that recursively splits the particles into 4 quadrants. Then we can easily find the center of mass of each quadrant recursively as well, making this an n log n algorithm. Then to calculate the gravitational force, we can query the quadtree and then use the approximation if it satisfies this criteria, where theta is a constant which determines how strong our approximation is. I didn't go deep into the algorithm in this video because there's already a great video about this by Deadlocked, which this entire project was heavily inspired by. Now we have gravity. However, notice that there are many particles that are exploding. This is because our particles get extremely close to each other, so their gravitational force is very high. Usually we would have to do some distance check, but in our case we are going to add collisions. I already mentioned that we use a Verlet integrator for collisions, so here's the code for the collision resolution if you're interested. It's the same code that I used in this video and the same code that this video uses. However, to detect these collisions, notice that we loop through each particle twice again, so it's n squared. Thankfully, we already have a data structure that groups these particles very conveniently. So instead of comparing with each other particle, let's draw a bounding box around this particle and then index the tree using an AABB intersection test. This is also n log n, fixing our performance issue. Actually, in my case, performance was still lacking, so I carried out some optimizations for both the collision mechanics and the gravity simulation to bring down the single simulation step from 700 milliseconds to 70 milliseconds. It's pretty boring what I did though, so I won't really explain it. Now the black hole. This part is actually quite simple. We just have a point at the center of the screen that exerts a very strong gravitational attraction to all the particles. Then if the particles get too close, we just delete them. Finally, in our renderer, we add some magic to make it look nice. Is this physically realistic? No. Can this even be considered a black hole? Probably not. But hey, it makes for some pretty good clickbait and awesome visuals, so I'll take it. Now, before I end off the video, let me show you some of the awesome visuals. This project was much more laid back, so tell me if you liked it more. As always, GitHub is always in the description. Till next time, bye!